Welcome to Legal Clarity, a podcast brought to you by Brenner Solicitors. Discover a blend of legal expertise, case studies, and real-life journeys that will inspire you. This episode features Sarah Finn and Lizzie Phillips, both experts in the field of conveyancing. Lizzie interviews Sarah about her experiences over her 35-year career.
So 35 years, that's been a long journey.
Yes, it has. It started straight after A-levels with my love of pads and pens, and decided I wanted an office job, and so for some random reason chose law and got a job in a local law firm, having written to all the law firms, and they decided property would be good for me. I didn't know any better, so yeah, that's where it started.
So what do you think's changed since you started to now?
The fundamentals of conveyancing property law are exactly the same. So the actual process is very similar. That's not changed massively. Aspects of it have changed a lot. So case management systems, we didn't have anything like that when I started. And to be fair, we didn't actually have computers on our desks. It was still electric typewriters. So everything was much more manual. You'd do completions in person sometimes with local firms, which was always quite nice. Go to the bank, get a bank draft and take it to the local firm that you dealt with all the time. But the fundamentals of like, you know, doing the exchange and doing the completion and having a contract and doing searches, that was all the same. It's just how we do it that's different rather than what we do.
So like compliance?
We didn't do compliance. Can't remember exactly when it came in. It kind of came in over a period of time, but when I started, we wouldn't have checked client's ID, trusted everyone was who they said they were, didn't have to check source of funds, which was obviously lovely because no one likes that. So compliance came in gradually. It started off knowing who your client was, then went into source of wealth, source of funding, and now that's a massive part of the job. Very time consuming, as you know. Takes a lot of time and effort to go through all of that at the beginning of a transaction. So that has, I believe, has contributed towards conveyancing taking longer now, because that can be quite an onerous procedure to go through.
So would you say that you dealt with a lot more local people and more of families of people rather than people further afield?
Yeah, when it was definitely much more. You dealt with people that were long established clients or knew people locally. It was based much more on people who knew you or knew of you, or recommendations for you as a person, and people were much more wanted family solicitors, so treated everyone like they were their family solicitor, and then once you acted for them, you would act for them again and again and again. And it would normally be local properties around the surrounding area. Sometimes if you knew someone, but because we didn't have, I sound ancient, don't I? We didn't have websites, so it was a case of you just instructed your local firm.
And word of mouth, I guess.
And word of mouth.
And I guess you wouldn't have had like the digital onboarding for ID and... None
of that. I remember when we first started getting computers.
You are now really sounding like the dinosaur ages.
It's awful, isn't it? It's so depressing. But when we first got them, it was to be able to do documents largely, and letters, but it was still very much everything went out by post. We didn't do anything by email back then, so it was still very much post, or clients would come in and visit you, and I remember when they came in, they would come in having gone home and changed from work clothes and
in their Sunday best,
to go and see their solicitor, and wouldn't just turn up off the street. So it was a very different environment back then to how it is now. And some things are better now. You know, the whole fact that we could do email is so much easier and quicker.
Yeah.
Although I do sometimes think it's not quicker because the volume of emails slow it down. So it's not the receiving it, it's the fact that you can receive so many that you
so quickly.
Whereas you used to get a pile of post that you would get sort of each day. You'd sit it on your desk and marry it up with the file. But no one knew when you were going to get that from the point they sent it, whereas with an email they know within.
And it's so much easier, I think, with post. You can just put it in date order and you just work
Yeah, from top to bottom.
Top to bottom, yeah.
Whereas you get emails coming in, clients then know
you've got
it. And other people, and then you can sometimes have multiple emails from.
And things blow up so much quicker over email as well, don't they? Like,
yeah. So, and I think it's that weird thing that speed actually slows it down, if that can make any sense at all. The speed of an email actually can make it slower just because it's.
Well, instead of receiving one letter, you end up with 10 emails all on the same thing, and it's all.
So it has its positives, and that I would say the biggest difference with email came out actually more recently with COVID. I think that's when there was a bigger shift from post to email.
I actually noticed that. Yeah, it was before COVID. It was a lot more. Contract papers always went by post.
Yeah.
Post COVID, it's
everything's
emails.
by email all the time.
So because you was obviously in the dinosaur ages, did you actually have phones? Like, or did you have one office phone?
No, we all had a phone.
You all had a phone?
But we did have, you did have this massive, in reception, the biggest, like, keyboard thing. I can't even describe it. And it was a bit like you see on really old films where people put buttons into...
Oh my God, that is really old.
This massive, like, switchboard that they'd press the buttons, whereas now you just have, like, a computer does it. But back then you'd have, like, a desk-sized switchboard. We had a desk-sized word processor, so the actual word processing department would produce the documents, because...
So you had a different team to process...
documents.
What, to handwrite them?
No, we're not that bad. I didn't work at the times of quills. But it was because secretaries would only have a electric typewriter.
Oh.
So they would type letters, and then documents, so your contract and your transfer, would be done by the word processing department.
I've just got real bad mental images of like...
But that was, I mean, when I started, Norfolk and Suffolk were still not, for about, I think it was about a year after I started, when they went compulsory registration. So they were still conveyance deeds.
Yeah, so I'm guessing when you first started, everything was unregistered, was it?
Pretty much. There was the odd registered thing, but pretty much everything was unregistered. And then the registration date came in, and I'm not going to quote it now because I'm not sure if I can remember it exactly, but I think it was 1990 that Norfolk and Suffolk went compulsory registration.
Yeah, it was early 1990s.
And so that was when they brought in transfer deeds, and initially it was called a transfer under Rule 72, which was effectively you had a different transfer deed if it was unregistered to go to registration to if it was already registered.
You also had the different SDLT.
Yeah, so that was very basic back then. It was lovely, but I do remember when they brought in SDLT, and it went from doing a A4 form where you just put very basic details in to a booklet that you had to fill in. And I remember conveyancers then like moaning about how suddenly they'd got something that was so easy before was so much more complicated, and then SDLT just seems to have got more and more complicated.
Yeah.
Ever since that day. So that's another massive change. That and the land registry process.
So we've done like the beginning with the compliance and the contract and transfer. So searches
are actually not that different.
Did you? I'm guessing you applied through the council. Did you?
Yeah, so
we
did them direct, but they were pretty much the same. I'm trying to remember. There may not have been an environmental search back then. It may have just been one search. I think we did just a local search that had everything in it. I can't actually remember whether we did have separate ones, but it was definitely the local search. And we had a local search book, which I have shown you, and we found one. The local authority book, which had details of every local authority in the entire country.
All the numbers, yeah. You have shown me.
It was like the Bible for conveyancers back in the day. But the actual if you see old deeds and you look back at a search from years and years ago, they don't look that different to local searches now. Other than the format's different for every council, but mainly they're very much the same.
I mean, they have colour now instead of just being black and white.
But and the information is pretty similar to the information you got back then. So searches haven't changed massively. How you get them has with search providers and things, but the actual search themselves,
they're all the same.
All very similar, yeah.
I guess it's all sort of similar information, and So how did they deal with mortgages then? Because obviously now it's all normally through the portals, or I mean, you get the old fax one come through.
That was all done by post, so you'd get a mortgage offer in the same sort of way that you would get one now, but it would all come through the post with your offer and your documents in it, and then you'd do your certificate of title, and that would go back in the post.
How did you get redemption statements in the post as well?
Yeah, we'd have had to write for them.
Oh, wow, so there was no quick last minute completions.
No, but I would say, interestingly, searches probably at one stage would take a couple of months, 2-3 months sometimes. You'd send your search off and forget when it was going to come back. But I still don't think, I think different things hold it up now to what slowed it up then. It was slow back then because we didn't have modern technology to speed it up.
Yeah.
But I sometimes think that modern technology has just meant it goes so fast that
it's unrealistic.
You can't always keep up with it.
Yeah.
And weirdly, I don't think fees have changed that massively for actual conveyancing services. I don't think
they've jumped in proportion.
Yeah. So I suspect conveyancers take on more work
to make up fees.
Make up for the I would imagine that's what would happen there.
So I'm guessing before you had less amount of work, but you were still bringing in what you needed.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember exactly.
And I'm guessing overheads are a lot more nowadays as well.
Yeah, they're bound to be,
So did you do much like simultaneous exchange and completions then, or not at all? Is that a newer thing?
I don't remember. I mean, we did some. I remember I did have one particularly tricky one that I had to try and get an occupiers form signed. And I had to take the client to the local solicitor, but so we did do it, but it was very much more. You went to exchange, and then you would have at least 2 weeks between exchange and completion, and then you would complete. And I think if there is anything that we could change about our system now, it would be to somehow make it still have that same sort of process, make it calmer. But I think sometimes that because it's not calm and everyone is a bit fraught because transactions are taking longer and chains are getting longer.
Yeah.
It builds up tension, which I think then slows it down. And sometimes I think if you could take away that tension, if we could have a system that wiped out everyone's uncertainty much earlier, I suspect the whole process would be much nicer and calmer for everybody.
And I don't know about you, but I'm finding more and more that you're getting less of a week between exchange and completion now. Yeah. Because everything is becoming so rushed.
Yeah, that it happens much quicker. So I think if I ever had any power to change it, I would make it so that when you, at the beginning stages, when you put your offer in, there was some way of making that commitment at that point, and you could only, a bit like the Scottish system, you could only pull out if there was a reason. And then I think that would take away people's edginess, because it's, I think most by nature of human nature these days, you feel a bit vulnerable if your life is in someone else's hands, and if you're in a chain, your life can be in someone's hands who's got a different agenda to you that you don't even know who they are. And I think that's what causes anxiety to people. If we could find a system where you made it at the beginning that you couldn't change your mind,
you had something to lose.
Yeah, I think that would make it much better. And I think if it was calmer, weirdly, I think it would be quicker.
So talking about power then, if you was granted 3 wishes of things that you could change about conveyancing or law in general, what would you do?
Oh my God, that's a tricky old question. Right, so my first one would be to make, so for property conveyancing transactions, I would make it so that there was more commitment at the beginning.
Yeah.
So that you couldn't just change your mind because you just fancied it. You could pull out if there was a structural defect, because I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
But that you couldn't have that, and I think that would make everything calmer. So the second thing, and I would say this isn't just for law, but life in general, I wish people would be kinder to people. Because I think that everyone's doing the best they can. Well, most people are. We're doing the best we can, and in whatever work environment you're in, we all have our own personal things we're dealing with, and I just wish that people could be just a bit kinder.
You just don't ever know what's going on in somebody's life.
And just look out for people a bit more. That would be nice. And number 3, depends if you want me to be serious or not.
Oh, I think it's your wishes.
My wishes. My wish would be that I could work on a Caribbean island somewhere with a cocktail in my hand all the time. But,
I think we'd all be joining you. Wouldn't be as peaceful. Okay, so what would you say to people when they're looking for a conveyancer? Why would you choose your conveyancer? Why would you choose Hatch Brenner? Why would you choose you?
I would say people should choose people. So choose someone that you think I can have a normal conversation with, because I think that makes life so much easier.
Yeah.
So the clients that you deal with and you have a normal conversation with, and it's not just clients, it's other contacts and people in the office and generally. So I would always say choose someone that you think actually I like the sound of them. I would recommend going local. I think it makes it, if something happens and you need to speak to them, your solicitor, or you need to go in and see them at the last minute or at any point, or you don't understand something, be able to actually see someone. Online is great, but online doesn't ever replace the person at the other side. So I would say choose someone that you think, yeah, okay, I can have a normal, relaxed conversation with that person.
Yeah. And I also think that people should let their conveyancer know how they prefer. Like, do they prefer to be spoken to face to face or over the phone or via email? Because every person is so different as well.
And just be honest with your conveyancer when you speak to them, and just phone them up and say, if you're finding it stressful, just say I'm finding it stressful. Because at the other side, if they're like we are, and everyone in our team is like this, we're all very personable, we all care.
Yeah.
And if you're struggling with the whole thing, just tell us and we'll do what we can to try and make it easier for you.
I generally do agree. I think everybody in the team generally feels responsible and wants to make sure that everybody gets the end result as quickly as possible and as smooth as possible. So I do think it's always, if you let somebody know, we can just take kind of that ease a little bit off.
Yeah, and I think it just makes it easier. When you build up a relationship with someone, everything is so much easier.
Yeah. It's less stressful.
Yeah.
So, we've spoken about how things have changed from when you first started.
Yeah.
Where do you think conveyancing is going?
Good question. So there's been loads of talk over years about systems coming in, of making it much more process driven, system driven, land registry. I remember there was a time they were talking about everything going via the land registry, money would all go via the land registry, everything would go via the land registry.
Monies?
Yeah, everything. It was
really?
going to go via some massive portal that was going to be managed. I don't think it's ever going to go like that.
Could you imagine how delayed everything would be?
That would be carnage. You can imagine everything based on one computer system, and when that crashed, everything would fall apart. So I don't think it'll go that way. I suspect it's not going to change massively. It will be like it has over the last 35 years. There'll be tweaks along the way. Land registry will get updated. Things will change. Systems will get better. But I think fundamentally, without some massive overhaul, the actual fundamentals are going to stay the same. I hope it doesn't change much more than that. I think that the system isn't ideal, so unless they overhaul it completely, then just let it be what everyone knows it to be, rather than the little tweak that every so often they'll come up with a little tweak that doesn't really make any difference. So either overhaul it, change it totally, or leave it relatively straightforward so that everyone knows what's going on.
Do you think fees will change? So we've said how the fees when you first started are near enough similar to what they are now. Do you think that they will ever go to a percentage, or?
I would like to think fees would increase, but I think at the moment it's unlikely to change massively, just because it's not changed that much in the last 30 years. I can't imagine it will do in my lifetime.
35 years, let's not forget.
I think stamp duty inevitably is going to change. It's one of those things that virtually every government and
it changes every couple of years.
It's just relentlessly changing, and I suspect that there'll be things that will change in stamp duty in the next year. So we'll just have to watch this space and see what they are.
Leasehold will change in the next.
Leasehold is obviously going to change
few
at
months
some point.
probably.
So yeah, there's lots of things happening, and to fix some of the little the glitches that need fixing in the process.
So what would you say, top tip, if you're buying and selling, that you think is a must do?
First thing is, I think if you're buying or selling, tell your solicitor as soon as you can, because the sooner you tell them, the quicker they can go through compliance, and compliance does take time. So the sooner you tell them, they can get your ID sorted out. If you're buying, the source of funds takes even longer than just the ID, so listen to what they need and provide it as quickly as possible. And it can be quite lengthy. There can be loads of bank statements.
Source of funding's hideous.
So that's my top tip to any client, is when you decide you want to do it, speak to your solicitor as soon as possible so they can get the file opened, get the compliance out of the way, and then as soon as memorandum of sale gets issued, we can crack on because we've got everything else done.
Yeah, completely agree. So many people wait until after the memorandum of sale's issued, and then you waste 2 weeks getting all your compliance done. Okay, so final thoughts. What would you say to people listening?
So don't be afraid of the documents that come through in the reports, because there can be a lot of paper. We're all here to help. We've got a great team at Brenner. Everyone in the team understands what's going on, sitting there waiting to help, willing to help. So if you get anything through and you don't really understand it, don't be afraid to email, pick up the phone and speak to anyone in the team, and we'll all be willing to help.
And I've got to say, actually, everybody in the team knows something. So even if they don't know everything, they can ask and find out and come back to people.
Yeah. And even more importantly, are quite happy to speak to people and deal with it. So we're very lucky with the team we've got.
We've got a very approachable team.
Yeah. So if anyone needs any further information or any help, all our numbers are on the website, www.hatchbrenner.co.uk. And there's also quite a lot of useful information, so take a look.